Hi, Luka.
Hello. Can you see me?
Yep, I can see you and hear you.
Okay, perfect. I just wanted to check in and see if it's working. It's good.
I'm guessing that Mr. Dipwek is going to be like pushing it to get here by 12 because he's in hearing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's interpreting in Washington County courts, and they're aware, and they're going to help him get logged in and give him an office space and a laptop.
Mm-hmm.
And then Judge Long, I'm sure she's also family law court usually goes right up till noon, so
Mm-hmm.
it'll be interesting to see how many people we get here early.
Okay.
And Mr. Enlet's going to be sharing the content, right?
Yes, he will, because he has a appropriate system or the thing you had to download to share.
Yeah, he had to download some plugins, to get the sharing to work with WebEx, and it was a little bit of a hassle. He had to download them, and it required a reboot. So,
Okay. Yeah, I just
yeah.
downloaded Remix too, like just right before getting into this meeting, because we kind of use Zoom or something in Chicago. So, yeah, it's fine. He's gonna be sharing.
Are you here now? Do you live here now, or are you still in Chicago?
I'm just here for a couple months, maybe till October, for the internship that I'm doing in his office. And I'll be going back to Germany for college after this. So my family still lives in Chicago, but at this point I'm studying in Germany already.
Wow, that's
Yeah,
exciting.
yeah, it is. But I was born in Germany and I am German. We just moved to the States 2019, so it's not like too big of a step. It is a little different because I did get used to like the American system and the culture and stuff like that. So going back is always kind of a little bit of a change for sure. You have to get used to and stuff. But I'm excited. And it's free, so it's a lot cheaper to study in Germany. And
Yeah.
yeah, that's why we decided to go.
Yeah, I'm studying German in the language. My husband speaks fluent German. He went to school there
Really?
when he was like 19.
Uh-huh.
So and we have his extended family who we've kept in touch with forever.
Wow.
Yeah,
Where do
I'm
they?
not very good at it.
Ah, oh, that's fine. It's a hard language. It's a very hard language. The grammar is insane. But where in Germany do they live?
Heidenheim.
Heidenheim.
Yeah,
Do you know
it's
the biggest city?
Bavaria.
Bavaria? Oh, oh, okay. So it's still in the south. That's
Yeah.
good. I live in the state right next to it, to the left. Baden-Württemberg. I don't really
Okay.
know
Yeah.
English name, but yeah,
And
yeah.
my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, was born in Berlin.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's nice. That's nice. Have you been to Germany or?
Nope, I need to. I want to. If COVID hasn't been here, I want to go and see the Weihnachtsmarkt. The
Oh, yes, that's definitely, it's really pretty. It's a very good, that's one of their strengths for sure, is the Weihnachtsmarkt. It's a very, very pretty time of the year. And it's in all types of, in all cities basically. Like even the smaller ones will have it and it's very nice for sure. Yeah. I do miss that when I live here, but it's a good experience for sure. So your husband is German or his,
no, well, his father is German American. The Germans worked in the Ukraine area, pre-World War II as farmers, and
yeah.
his family came from that group of people. But they
Okay.
always identified as German. And then when they emigrated from the Ukraine, went settled in North Dakota, and so that's where the German came from on his side.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Interesting. That's really good.
Hello, Mr. Enlet.
Hello, Roger, and everybody else.
Hi, Yvette.
Hi.
And
I was telling Luka that Marcus may be a few minutes late because I'm sure he's trying to get, signed in the Washington County court system because he was in a hearing this morning.
Okay.
Hi, Judge Long.
Hello.
Mr. Dipwek is with the tech in Washington County right now. They're trying to get him signed in. Hello, Mr. Dipwek. Can you hear us?
Hi, Roger. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, we can't hear you. Give me 1 second.
Okay.
Let's go.
Don't put us background.
Yes, give me 1 second.
Any sound yet?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Can you hear us?
Okay, great. Yep, I can hear you.
I can't because we're not using the meetings app. There's
Okay, Judge Long.
settings up.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started then.
Gotcha.
And can we make sure everyone's unmute right now? There's a little feedback. Thank you.
Is this view okay, or do you want something different?
Yeah, this is okay. So you
You
want me
can,
to?
if you want, you can like close. If you hit this little X right here, then it, up, down, one more, right here.
Right there.
Or you can just hit the participants,
This one?
and then it'll be bigger.
Okay. So am I muted or?
Here, so you can mute yourself.
Oh, okay.
Okay, we'll get started. Thank you all so much for being here today. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Judge Long. I use pronouns she, her, hers. We're here today to learn about the Chuukese language, culture, and community in Portland. I'm very excited about this. Chuukese is the third most common interpreter requested here in Multnomah County courts, but I'm guessing that, like me, most of you don't know a lot about this culture. So hopefully this will help us improve our work and interactions with litigants from this community. A couple of quick reminders and guidelines. This Lunch and Learn session is being recorded. The recorded session will be available to OJD staff and judges next week. A link to the recording and links to additional resources related to today's topic will be sent to our judges and court employees in a subsequent email. During today, each of our speakers will be discussing their language, culture, and personal experiences. Please feel free to type questions into the chat. I'll keep an eye on the chat and will address any questions with the speakers towards the end of the hour. At the end of the session, Roger will post a link to a feedback survey in the chat. Please take a moment to provide feedback for both the presenters and the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. It's very helpful for us. And CLE credit is available for this session. So if you're an attorney and you want CLE credit, please be sure to type your full name and bar number into the chat right now, and we'll pass that information along to the bar. I also want to give a shout out to Yvette from Court Language Access Services for her help in securing our Chuukese interpreter, Marcus Dipwek, to speak with us today. So it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers. First, we have Consul General Joe Enlet. Consul General Enlet was born and raised in CHUUK, Micronesia, and has lived in Portland and Vancouver, Washington for the last 12 years. He currently serves as the Consul General for the newly established Consulate General Office of the Federated States of Micronesia, or FSM, here in Portland. Mr. Enlet is the official diplomat of Micronesia to the Western United States. Prior to this position, he was a senior policy analyst at Multnomah County Public Health Department in the Health Equity Initiative program. He has worked as a community organizer and advocate for many years within the Pacific Islander community, both locally and nationally. He is the immediate past president of COFA Alliance National Network, a national organization that advocates for islanders from the FSM, Palau, and the Marshall Islands, and works on policy issues at the state and federal level. Mr. Enlet was appointed in 2019 to the Oregon Legislature Task Force for addressing racial disparities in homeownership. He formerly served as a policy commissioner with the New Portlander Policy Commission and served as a member of the Oregon Health Insurance Marketplace Advisory Committee. Mr. Enlet currently serves on the Washington Advisory to the U.S. Civil Rights Commission and is co-chair of the API Advisory Committee to the Portland Police Bureau. In 2018, the City of Portland awarded Mr. Enlet with the Emily Gottfried Human Rights Award as an emerging leader. He also serves his church, the CHUUK Logos Community Church in Vancouver, Washington, as a lay minister. Next, we have Marcus Dipwek. Marcus Dipwek is a regular qualified Chuukese interpreter, although you'll find out what exactly that means, providing services at the Oregon Judicial Department for the past 13 years, primarily in Multnomah and Marion counties. Mr. Dipwek began learning English in elementary school and continued through high school in CHUUK, Micronesia. He studied at Porterville College and Portland Community College. Mr. Dipwek works in the Pacific Northwest and nationally, interpreting for medical, social services, education, banking, administrative hearings, corrections, and governmental agencies. Finally, we're joined by Luka Rauchholz from Chicago, Illinois, who is currently an intern at the Consulate General of the Federated States of Micronesia in Portland, Oregon, under the supervision of Consul General Joe Enlet. Ms. Rauchholz lived in CHUUK, Micronesia for an impacting number of years during her childhood and adolescence, during which time she learned the Chuukese language and attended public high schools in 2 different regions. One of those regions is one of the least developed and notoriously violent regions of CHUUK State. After graduating from high school in CHUUK, Ms. Rauchholz worked for an international NGO that serves the people of CHUUK in the field of education for children, specifically in underdeveloped parts of CHUUK. Over the years, she was able to gain a variety of firsthand experiences on cultural traits and lifestyle of the Chuukese community. Ms. Rauchholz uses this knowledge to share and create a better understanding of the Chuukese community in Oregon. This fall, Ms. Rauchholz will commence law studies at the University of Tübingen in Germany. And with that, I'll turn it over to our presenters.
Thank you, Judge Long. And everybody here. Can you hear me? Judges and everybody on the call, we're very thankful and honored to be here with you and to talk with you. I just want to mention also that I joined many of you, I think a few weeks ago, to talk about the larger PI community here in Oregon. So some of it may seem repetitive, but I think you'll find some very interesting information that's more in depth about the Chuukese community specifically. So I will be sharing a PowerPoint that will follow. And as Judge Long mentioned, we will be accepting questions towards the end of the presentation. So
Oh, Mr. Enlet, we cannot hear you.
Roger, do you see a little yellow triangle in the upper left corner of his?
I do.
Okay. Do you know what that
Yeah.
signifies? Is it a
It
bad
just shows low bandwidth. There he is. Mr. Enlet, are you back?
oh, they did not show up.
Yeah, you were you disappeared for a second and I couldn't hear you either. So just after you were done telling us about the last presentation and that questions would be answered at the end, then you disappeared
Okay.
and now you're back.
Okay, so I am clicking on the PowerPoint here.
There we go.
It's
It's
coming
coming
up?
up now. Yes,
Okay.
we can see it.
Okay, all right. Hopefully you're still on, or you can see.
Yes, we can see. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, so there's three of us here, and we'll be kind of taking part in each of the slides. But we'll start off with Luka, who's going to give us a little bit of background information and knowledge about CHUUK in relation to where it is on the map, or in the Pacific Ocean, and also the country of the Federated States of Micronesia. So Luka, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Enlet. You can go to the next slide. So I'll just dive right in with where and what is CHUUK. It's a very small place. Not a lot of people know it or have heard of it. It's a part of an island country in the Federated States of Micronesia. As you can see, it's located in the Western Pacific, pretty close to the continent of Asia and right by the American territory Guam. The Federated States of Micronesia, they consist of four different states, of which CHUUK is the highest populated, with a population of about 15,000 people. The area is 47 square miles-ish. You can go to the next slide if you want, if you would. There you can see these are the CHUUK Islands. It's the CHUUK Lagoon. The Mortlaks are not on here. Those are the outer islands. But the current governor is Alexander Naroon, and the capital is on the right, that island Wura, right there. Yeah, there are 5 regions in CHUUK. The FAICHUK area that's on the left, you'll see it in more detail in a couple slides back. The northern and southern Namorias, and the Mortlaks, which are the outer islands, like I've already said. All of these 5 regions have different dialects, and like a lot of the words are also very different, which makes it very hard to translate. Some of these regions are more developed than others. These are pictures of the main island on Wura, where the airport is. This is where you'll have all the stores. This is where there are roads that are paved and there's cars and internet. But to give a more detailed example, we'll see the region of FAICHUK. Yeah, as you can see, this is the region of FAICHUK. It's about 17 square miles and has a population of around 16,000 people. And yet it only has one high school in the entire area and one college, which is mainly islanders from all the other areas attending. There are no hospitals on this island, no stores, no roads, no cars. It's the least developed region in all of CHUUK, and there's basically been no internet or Wi-Fi up until last month. Like it's a very recent development, you could say. The formal justice system is not enforced adequately, which often leads to higher rates of violence in the area. Mainly also because there are not a lot of resources or the money isn't available to the police departments over there. So the way they enforce it is just very different and limited. Exactly. You can continue. Yeah, this is these here you can see the pictures of the environment that a lot of these kids grow up in. They don't really have roads. This is on the left, you'll see the picture is probably one of the best roads that they have. It's like clean, and still there's like a lot of water. A lot of these kids will take this road to school or go by boat, like you can see on the bottom picture to the right, if they don't have a motorboat. In the top right corner, those are the what's it called? The mangroves. This is also a main part of especially that area and those islands. The kids will stand in the left and right. Sometimes they'll walk through or climb through to get to school also. In the next slide. This is basically where they live, and this is, I guess, the environment they grow up in this specific region. As you can see, there's not really an infrastructure in place. They live mainly off of what they cook and they plant themselves. A lot of the kids that grow up in this specific region, they don't ever go to the main island even, so they'll grow up only in this kind of an environment. They won't go to school because there's no real roads and it's harder to get there. They might not have the money for gas to go by a boat. So clearly this is a very undeveloped region with lack of resources and no form of healthcare or education. Well, there is a form of education, but there's barely any teachers that would go because it's also known to be significantly more violent than some other regions in CHUUK. Yeah, you can continue. Oh, are you gonna go to the next slide, Mr. Enlet? Oh yeah, this is your part.
Okay, thank you, Luka, for that quick introduction. So just a little bit about the historic background. Micronesia was colonized by a few different countries dating back to the 1800s. So just a quick background, we were first under the rule of Spain, and then after Spain, we were sold to Germany. So Germany then became our colonizer during those years. And after Germany, of course, after World War I, then we have Japan that came and kind of took over the islands. Japan was at that time entrusted these islands under the League of Nations. Then after the World War II, Japan, the United States then took over administration over the islands. They were first under what was called the Trust Territory of the Pacific Islands, or TPI government. And this is where we were an actual territory of the United States. We were entrusted to the United States under the United Nations, and this was codified under the Security Council of the United Nations. The purpose was that the United States would continue to administer the islands while also helping the islands to become more self-sufficient, developed, and then to become independent. That then led to, in 1986, when the governments within Micronesia, including the Republic of Palau and the Republic of the Marshall Islands and the Federated States of Micronesia, they all voted to become independent nations. So they created their own constitutional governments, and then formally under the United Nations became their own sovereign entities. Now, one of the most important factors to that political status is that all the three main Micronesian island nations during that time, Palau, FSM, and the Marshall Islands, entered into what's called the Compact of Free Association. That is basically an international treaty with the United States. So even though they are independent countries, they do have a special relationship with the United States. There are many provisions within this Compact of Free Association, but one of the main ones is that the United States will maintain full military power over the region in perpetuity, and also having denial rights. So basically they can deny any other country or military, foreign military to enter into the area. Because of that compact as well, Micronesians enjoy visa-free travel to the United States. So immigration is not an issue for Micronesians who are wanting to travel from the islands to the U.S. territories such as Guam, Hawaii, USA, and Alaska. All they need is to bring their passports, and then they're issued a document that's called I-94 to them, and basically that does not expire. So that explains also the large number of people who are migrating to the U.S. Oregon, obviously, as we can see there, has nearly 10,000 Chuukese in the United States. That's probably one of the highest, if not the highest, population of Chuukese in any state in the United States. Trying to move along here. Okay, so here we have the reasons why people are migrating to the U.S. A lot of it is for education, job opportunities. People want to raise their families here because, as Luka mentioned, the infrastructure back home is not that well developed, especially the education system. So many parents want to bring their family here so that their children can have access to education, and also to be able to find job opportunities. Because the islands don't have a strong infrastructure as well within their health system, that's also one of the reasons why people come to the U.S. to seek health access. There are also companies that are recruiting folks from CHUUK to come and work in their nursing homes. That's an example of some of the reasons why people are moving here, and not just nursing homes. There are other fields like some construction companies, some fishing companies as well. And that is also a provision under the compact where companies can recruit people from the Federated States of Micronesia to come and work here. And because they don't have to go through the process of applying for a visa or getting a work permit, a lot of people do come through the means of recruitment. I will mention also in this place that climate change is also playing a role in the reasons why people are leaving the islands. It is climate change is known to be affecting the fish stocks that the islands have, the health of the coral reefs, because people rely on that for their survival, and also the crop. There are more floodings that are happening, and once the sea comes onto the land, it affects things like their taro patches and breadfruit trees. So that is some of, one of the rising factors for people leaving the islands and coming to the United States to try to get a better life.
Some of the main cultural traits of the Chuukese culture are the ones listed here on this PowerPoint. The first one would be that it's a shame culture, which means that there's a high emphasis on preserving honor and not being publicly disgraced. This also plays into the family and group orientedness of the clan system. Basically, it means that the actions of a single person will reflect the overall group or family he's in, and that there is not a lot of individuality for the people, especially the younger ones, because within the family and group-oriented clan system, there's also a very strong hierarchy. So people or relatives that are older or in higher positions basically get to order the younger population around. There's a high feeling for respect within the Chuukese community. There are many different ways of expressing that, especially before the higher positioned relatives or the older population of the Chuukese. Many of these are expressions that we in our Western culture would not really understand because they're so different from what we, or sometimes even the opposite of what we would expect for respectful behavior. It'll also show in some of the next slides, or like it'll be self-explanatory in some of the other examples we'll be giving. And sharing is one of the most important cultural traits to them, especially because it's a very important part for the harmony and the preservance of good relationships. Ownership is not individual, since it's very group oriented. What belongs to you belongs to everyone. Yeah, it's a very big part of their system, I would say. Because still to the family and group oriented part, the parenting is not considered by, or is not taken over by only the parents. It will be the uncles, it might be the grandparents. Basically the whole clan or anyone that's above you in hierarchy is allowed to tell you what to do or raise you a certain way and things like that. Yes, you may go to the next slide.
So here is kind of a little a description of Chuukese lifestyle here in Oregon and in other states. This may be also similar. As was mentioned earlier, it's very family oriented, but also church oriented. Most of the country, and including CHUUK, is all, they profess to be Christians. So it is a culture that is heavily dominated by Christianity. And when people move to the US, they establish churches. And here in Oregon, there are probably close to 20 Chuukese churches just in Oregon. And Mark here, our co-presenter, is part of one of the largest and oldest Chuukese churches here in Oregon. But along with those ways that people group together, there are a lot of obligations, and those obligations are paramount. So even if, let's say, a family may be struggling financially or struggling with certain needs of the family, oftentimes the extended family obligations and the church obligations will be prioritized more than their individual or nuclear family needs. That, I think, is also a very important characteristic of Chuukese families in Oregon. Living situations, that is, you know, people live together, so you have extended families or clans even, where people are living together in a single house or even an apartment. This is a common practice in the islands and also in Micronesia. That's just the way society is built there. And so they kind of reflect that as well, coming to the US. There are, of course, families that are becoming more and more individual and kind of on their own. But the collective living situation is a very common characteristic of the community. In terms of people coming over, most adults, and this is from some surveys that we found, is that most adults work. They are employed, and they obviously are overwhelmingly, you know, within the service industries, labor, and many of them also work at minimum wages. So in terms of their upward mobility, that is something that doesn't really exist. Many of these people get into these jobs, and because they haven't had a formal education or know much English, they then tend to just kind of stay at that level and don't really improve or get higher paying jobs. Also, when people come over, they usually travel to the place where maybe their relatives first came, and they also go to these jobs where it doesn't require much English because they're very manual jobs, and then the people who recruited them to be there would be the ones speaking on their behalf. So that's kind of the environment in terms of people being employed. And of course, because there is a focus on family, one of the top priorities for people is to raise their families by sending their children to the schools. So even though they themselves do not go to school or haven't had a chance to go through a formal education system, all families really want their children to succeed in school. And so that's kind of a high priority within the Chuukese community. I'm going to turn it over now to, oh, sorry. Actually, this is also my part. So to continue on that, Chuukese living in Oregon or the Chuukese lifestyles, there are obviously big problems or issues that cause, you know, certain barriers within the community. So I'll mention a few of these, and I think these would be very informative, I know, for people here. Obviously, the language is an issue, language barriers and also cultural barriers. We will get more into this, but this is one of the reasons why there's a lot of misunderstandings. And that just comes from different readings or interpretations of behavior, and also the way that, you know, people are able to understand what's going on around them. There's not too many, I guess, resources out there that will address the need for Chuukese, especially older generation, to learn the English language to be able to at least get by or survive in this setting. Also, as is common, there's a lack of culturally and linguistically appropriate resources for our communities. And I know that this is also a systemic issue, but that contributes to the difficulties for people to be able to navigate these systems, especially when people are here and need medical attention or need to get covered for, say, insurance purposes. There are certain policy barriers as well. So that's not just because of a lack of cultural and linguistic resources. There are also some there are some policies that don't allow FSM citizens to be able to access some of these services. And I want to mention one of the biggest ones is what happened in 1996 during the Welfare Reform Act of 96. So basically, when this happened, there was a recategorization of the immigrant status for Micronesians. So basically, the practical effect of that was that though these are people who enter the U.S. legally under the Compact of Free Association, the policy was such that it excluded categorically all Micronesian citizens from the basic safety net programs that people need. So we're talking about Medicaid, we're talking about TANF or temporary assistance for needy families, welfare, food stamps. No, these are very critical basic needs, and even access to student loans, federal student loans. And these were all programs that Micronesians had access to prior to 1996. But after that federal policy, then most people, Micronesians became ineligible. However, there has been a lot of work that many advocates have been involved in to try to turn this around. So in Oregon, there have been some legislative policy change work that have created some programs to fill in the gaps, although I will say that there's still a lot more work to be done. I just want to mention a few. There was the passing of the COFA Premium Assistance Program, where the state actually helped to pay for premiums for health insurance for Micronesians who are low income. So if they met the Medicaid income threshold, then they would qualify for the state-based premium assistance program. So that is one of the, I guess, victories in Micronesia for advocacy work of Micronesians in Oregon. The other one that just passed in the last session here in Oregon was to give tuition equity to Micronesian students. So because of that status that Micronesians have when they enter the US, sometimes they don't meet the specific residency requirements for certain states. And so Micronesian students in Oregon were not able to get in-state tuition, even though they live and are residing in Oregon. That legislation also passed in the Oregon legislature just this past session. And then about a year ago, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, there was actually some legislative work that happened on the federal level, which then made all citizens of the 3 Micronesian nations eligible again for Medicaid. So at least for the the Medicaid part of all the safety net programs, Micronesians are now newly eligible for that. So these are, I'm just getting into some of the policy barriers that makes life hard for folks, because if they don't have any kind of affordable health insurance, we all know what happens is they go to the ER, and that is their only experience and knowledge of the medical system is really going to the emergency room. That's how they see the doctors. But even the ER is much better for them than what they have back in CHUUK, which is a very inadequate medical service. And then underrepresentation, of course, there is not much representation for Micronesians in local policy making. And then just lack of opportunities. Again, if they're living in the state but paying out-of-state tuition, it makes education that much more difficult for them. And not being able to access classes for learning English as a second language, then that does not translate into better employment opportunities. So these are some of the barriers that Chuukese face in Oregon. The next part will be Mark Dipwek's part. So Mark, go ahead.
Hello everybody. Yeah, this is Mark Dipwek, which they call me Mark. Mostly Chuukese, they call me Mark, but in real life, my name is Marcus. That's what I use in court. As one of you guys maybe heard me in court, that's what I've been doing for almost 13 years. And I've seen a challenge in Chuukese language in court. One of them is, as you see on the screen, multiple different dialects. That's a challenging in our court system. In CHUUK, there are 5 regions. Each region has different dialect. So when the dialect came into court, it's very difficult. As Joe mentioned, justice system in it just became recently. Some of those words you might heard me saying in court, it will take me a long time to interpret. Because of what? The word, we don't have that in justice system in CHUUK. For example, juries. There is no juries in CHUUK system when it comes to court. So some of those words I might get it shorter, or I might I will say in Chuukese, I will say it in English, and I might add up maybe 1 or 2 letters for the meaning, and then I will explain. That's the reason why it takes a little bit long time to interpret that words, because we don't have that words in Chuukese justice system. And I've seen a lot of challenges that in court. For example, as you see in the map on of those region, as Luka mentioned, Weda, that's our main capital city in CHUUK. So that's where all the stores, big stores, airplane, cars, they're at. Some of those defendants, they end up in court in Oregon. They never been in court system on their island. Some of them, they just came from one region to the main region where just to get their passport ready and flew to Oregon. So they haven't been exposed to cars, airplane, big stores. That's the reason why it's very difficult, the Chuukese language, that we get it in court, because of some of those reasons. People are not familiar with all court system. Mostly when they came to Oregon because of job opportunities or family requesting them because they need to work so they can help pay for the rent. So those are the kind of people there end up in court because of what? The system. They don't realize how severity or hard the court system here in Oregon. I've seen a lot of cases that sometimes they send them to those treatment center or send them to treatment for their probation. And when they go to those treatment center, sometimes it's cultural. Back home, we don't, in some of those private meetings, they don't allow women or men in their meeting. So that's some of those barriers that I end up seeing it when I did assist in those treatment center. Some of those things they did in those treatment center, it's sometimes very, very difficult for the Chuukese that they don't speak English to comprehend or understand. Some of those treatment centers, they will bring family members. As I said, family members, they only interpret what they want, but they don't interpret the whole thing. That's the problem that we are facing too. That's why some of those defendants or people, they do it again because of what? Lack of understanding what they were supposed to do on their probation or in the treatment center. And as I said, when we came to US, they say land of opportunity. And he will open up a land of everything. Let us say they're into drugs. Back home, maybe only one, marijuana. But when they came to the US, they found out there's more than marijuana. So that's why they try it out. That's why they end up in court. And some of those languages or Chuukese words or language is very, very difficult. Us that we've been interpreted in court, sometimes we get together. So we try to formulate what kind of language we're going to use or use together. As I said, there are 5 dialects or more than 5 different dialects in CHUUK. And that's a challenging when it comes to court. I'll stop from here. Maybe Joe will continue if you have something to say. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mark, for that. I don't know if Roger can give me access to share the PowerPoint again. I don't know what happened.
Yes, I can.
Okay. Okay, so just a few things again. I really want to emphasize what Mark has mentioned is that words are translated to meaning rather than word to word. That is because there is no equivalence. there. But the other part of it is that word to word translations, sometimes the word may have a negative connotation in the Chuukese language, whereas in the English language it's just neutral. There is no, no negative intention meant. But sometimes in the Chuukese language, it can carry a different meaning that way. So then translators who are really good, like Marcus, they would use a different word or a different explanation of what the word is. I will hand it over to Luka, and this is her part.
Thank you, Joe. So there are a lot of very common misunderstandings, especially cultural misunderstandings between the Chuukese and the Western system. First of it is probably the systemic differences. As you saw before, in some of the islands, there's not really an infrastructure in place, and there are things that we would assume they automatically understand when they come here, but the system itself is something that they would have to learn. So, for example, when we went to Micronesia to teach at the schools, we would have to teach the children how to mark a question on a test or something like that, because they had a test, and from our perspective, it'd be completely normal to, you see an answer, you just answer the question. But to them, we still had to teach them the whole concept of a test sheet, how to mark the question, to put the check mark in the box and things like that, because that's something they wouldn't know or understand or use in their own cultural system. So these are small things that we are so used to, and we completely forget that, or we wouldn't know that they don't have any of these things coming from an island, from FAICHUK, or even from FAICHUK or some of the others around the main island. These are just concepts that are so normal to us, but they've never been confronted with. So they're like things that we would assume they know, even though they don't. Another thing is the perception of justice. The justice systems in itself are, like Mark explained, completely different. And because it's so clan driven or family oriented, a lot of the times when there's a dispute, the two families will decide upon a punishment or some form of justice, and they will decide on it together, and then it will be done, basically. So a lot of them, when they come here, they might handle it among themselves in the Chuukese community in Portland, and then when the court appearance happens and the Chuukese will be sentenced to, I don't know, maybe time in jail, a lot of them might not react understanding, because to them they've already fixed the issue. And then in CHUUK, sometimes it will happen ever since the newer system arrived, or the Americanized justice system, that a judge will make a decision for the person with the felony, and even after the families themselves have already basically made peace or found an agreeable punishment, both of these families will come and be mad at the judge for giving him an extra punishment, even though they already settled it for themselves. So their system of justice is completely different, and their perception of how it works here, sometimes they have a hard time understanding all the new ways, and the fact that you will go to jail for some of these things, because to them it'll be handled very differently, often by through sometimes beatings or just physical discipline, I guess you could say. So to them, these things, it'll be carried out once and then they're free to roam the next day. That's just their way of creating a fair punishment. There will also be public apologies that play into all of these things, especially because of if your face was publicly disgraced. There will be also there are ceremonies to publicly apologize, which to them is an act of making peace. So they won't need like the Western idea of a punishment like jail and things like that. Another thing would be their respectful behavior, and the things that they do to show respect are oftentimes things that in Western culture seem a little bit weird, or we wouldn't exactly understand that that's their form of respect. For example, towards the elders or the higher position people, eye contact is not very common, especially if you're being scolded. To look someone in the eyes, being disrespectful and challenging them, which is why a lot of times they'll kind of avoid the eye contact, or they'll be silent in the presence of older siblings. Maybe I've experienced a lot of times that I will have a conversation with someone, and then their older brother joins, and all of a sudden they go quiet and they don't say another thing, and the older brother will continue talking about maybe something different, but they're silent to show respect for the elder. So strictly speaking, me as a speaker, together with Mr. Dipwek and Mr. Enlet, I would not be allowed to speak because both of them are older than me and they are in higher positions. So this is a very unusual thing for me even to be allowed to speak next to these two. Another thing are the power of family relations that we often underestimate, because it's not normalized in the Western culture. We are very individual. The Chuukese, based on their family relations, anything the older person says they will do normally. So a lot of their behavior and their actions are shaped and influenced by what an elder or a person in a higher position will tell them to do or expect them to do, things like that. And it's very hard to get out of this kind of a system if you grow up with it and you're used to it, which also leads to the underestimation of environmental influence. A lot of these kids grow up in a very uneducated, in a very underdeveloped region, or they won't really have access to internet, things like that. So a lot of things are very new to them, and they're just used to things like getting spanked for as a form of raising your children. You're allowed to spank them, I guess in a way also harder than we would spank our kids. So to them, it's kind of a normal way of life, and physical violence to our perception is not as bad to them, because words and the verbal things that they would say that are bad are considered worse than just getting a slap, slap on the head or something like that, because words are considered worse than just an act of physical discipline. Also, they'll use it as a form of communication, since there is this strong hierarchy. They can't talk up to their relatives, so if they feel embarrassed or they're angry, especially if they're angry with their older relatives, they can't confront them about it because it's an act of disrespect. You wouldn't talk back to someone who is older than you. So they'll find a different way to catch their attention, sometimes through public misbehavior. So the family will see, oh, he's upset, and they will know it's because of them. Yeah, I have an example of, I guess, the Western and the Chuukese culture together, especially in police interaction, because this is also a reason why a lot of the Chuukese end up in front of court. Of course, there are a lot of them that do commit crimes, and they should, be punished for a lot of them. But there are also a lot of Chuukese that are not guilty, and they will be stopped by police, and they will act a certain way to show respect, and the police will misunderstand it, and they will end up in court. So, for example, in this scenario, if the police officer stops a Chuukese and he might avoid eye contact. So a lot of people here would seem like they have little respect, or it's a little guilty behavior. They might be hiding something like that. While for the Chuukese, it's the respect before the older and higher positioned person, not to challenge them by looking them in the eye. Another thing that they will do is they'll apologize. It's their way of being polite, and they'll apologize for the trouble of the policemen to even have to stop them and spend their time with this kind of a thing. While most policemen, if you start apologizing, even though they haven't really said anything yet, a lot of them will assume that they might be admitting to something. They feel like they got caught, some things like that. Another thing a lot of them will do is they'll just be quiet, or they're not really willing to talk, especially the younger men or women. And in a lot of cases, this is also because of the family hierarchy. If things happen and there are disputes or fights, they won't clear them up themselves, but they'll send, like, an older relative will represent them and speak with the older relative of the other person, and then they will clear them up and apologize for them, and then the matter is settled, basically. So a lot of them will have a hard time speaking up towards the police and things like that. And sometimes, in the craziest cases, they might even agree with the accusations, which would automatically mean that they are guilty. But in their perspective, a lot of times it's their way of showing respect, and this leads back to the shame culture, because you don't want to embarrass someone, especially the people that are in higher positions than you, to make them lose their face and things like that. So they'll just silently agree with whatever the accusations are for at first, because they think they wouldn't think that the police officer doesn't understand their own way of thinking, because it's so common to them, especially since they live mainly in their own communities. It'll be in a way that they don't want to confront the police officer, or they don't want to correct them because they're in a higher position, and they don't want to embarrass them in that way, telling them, oh, you made a mistake, I'm not really guilty, or I didn't do this, just because they're trying to save the person's face, or not make them feel embarrassed, because that's the common thing that they do. They will just go along with whatever is said and nod quietly, and then assume that the other person finds out later on. Yeah, thank you. I'll give back to Joe.
And just a reminder quickly that we have about 2 minutes left. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Judge. I was just going to say that we can send this PowerPoint to people so that we can skip this last part. But this is basically the presentation. So for the last couple minutes, if people have any questions at all.
So one question that we have is, Mr. Enlet, you mentioned that Oregon has one of the highest, if not the highest, Chuukese populations in the US, and you talked a lot about why people might be migrating here. But can you to the US in general, can you say why Oregon and Portland in particular is such a focused population? Do you have any insight?
Yes, and I think that the historical reason is that back when we were still under the Trust Territory of the Pacific Islands, or TTPI, there was a federal program that came to take young people from Micronesia and then place them in small colleges in the United States as their way of, say, trying to develop education for people to go back to their countries and help in their nation building efforts. Well, one of those colleges was the college down in Monmouth, which is now Western Oregon. It was also out in La Grande, so Eastern Oregon, even at Linfield College. So these colleges then became kind of places where a lot of the Chuukese came during that time, but only students could come. After 1986, when we did enter into the compact and there was visa-free travel, people just went to where there were already students because they were familiar with that. And so people then gathered here in Oregon, which was one of the places where people went to school. That's the historical reason. And just because of where, Oregon is close to the Pacific Ocean, it's closer, it's a little bit cheaper than some of the other states. I don't know how accurate that is. But then also right now, because we've been doing a lot of work and advocacy and partnerships with the state, people are being more attracted to Oregon because it's a little bit more friendlier than some of the other states. So that's kind of my uneducated answer to that.
Thank you. Very quickly, have there been any issues with people being trafficked or exploited from CHUUK?
Thank you, Judge Long. Again, yes, that is something that has happened throughout this history. There are people who a lot of them were recruited, to do these types of jobs, but then, maybe the employers were not treating them fairly, took away their passports and things like that. There are also people who, were involved in some of these adoption rings where they adopt these babies, but then there was just a lot of, I guess, inappropriate actions that were done with mothers who were brought here, and then they give birth, and then there were people who adopted them for very, you know, they did not treat the mothers well enough. And so these were some of the big issues that we also have faced. And yeah, it's pretty common also.
All right. There are more questions about things like how mental illness is understood, but unfortunately we're over time. Would it be okay if we include your contact information when we send out the slides so that if people have follow-up questions, they can reach out to you?
Yes, please do. I'm okay with that.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Hopefully we'll be able to include that. So thank you all so much. This was fantastic and so informative and helpful, especially as we interact with these folks in court every day. As a reminder, Roger has put in the chat link or in the chat box a link to the feedback survey. If everyone can just very quickly take a second to fill that out before they forget, that is so helpful for us and we'd really appreciate it. So thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marcus and Luka and Joe. I think Joe's already gone.
Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and close the WebEx. If anyone has any questions or needs a copy of the survey, just let me know.